The ship was dead when they found it, drifting through the cold black void like a broken tooth knocked loose from a giant's mouth. And Captain Arjun Malakar of the ESS Defiance knew something was terribly wrong the moment his sensors picked up the wreckage. "Bring us closer," he said to its helmsman, and the Defiance turned its nose toward the shattered vessel that tumbled end over end through the darkness near the edge of the Orion Spur. It was a Velthari ship. Arjun could tell by the curved hull plating and the faint blue shimmer of its dead engines. And the Velthari were not a species that died easily. They were traders, wanderers, beings who had crossed the stars for 10,000 years before humanity ever left its own atmosphere. And yet here one of their ships floated in silence, cracked open like an egg, its crew already gone. "Captain, I am picking up something," said Lieutenant Priya Sen from the communications console, her voice tight with confusion. "There is a signal repeating from the black box, just one phrase, over and over again." Arjun walked to her station and leaned over her shoulder as she brought the signal to the main speaker. And the bridge of the Defiance fell silent as a voice, cold, alien, recorded in the ancient trade language known as Old Galactic, repeated the same words in an endless loop. "The Hollow has returned." No one on the bridge spoke for a long time after that. They did not know what it meant, and that was what scared them most of all, because in Arjun's experience, the things you did not understand were always the things that could kill you. He ordered the black box recovered and the wreckage scanned, and then he set course for Earth at maximum speed, because whatever had torn apart a Veltari cruiser, with weapons his sensors could not even identify, was not something he wanted to face alone in the dark. 3 days later, Arjun stood in the war room of Earth's United Admiralty on the orbital station above Geneva, and he played the recording for the 12 most powerful military leaders humanity had, and he watched their faces as the words filled the room. "The Hollow has returned." Admiral Rena Vasquez, the oldest officer in the fleet, a woman whose silver hair and calm eyes had seen more battles than most people had seen birthdays, leaned forward in her chair and said, "Has anyone heard this term before?" Had. Not a single admiral, not a single intelligence officer, not a single analyst in the entire building could tell them what the Hollow was. And when they forwarded the findings to the Galactic Concord, the vast governing body over 4,000 alien species that had grudgingly given humanity a minor seat at its table, the response was not what Arjun expected. There was silence. Absolute, total, suffocating silence that lasted for 6 standard hours, and then a single message came back from the Concord's high chamber, stamped with the authority of the eldest species in the galaxy. "Disregard the transmission and destroy all records immediately. This matter does not concern humanity." Arjun felt the hair on the back of his neck stand up when he read those words, because in his life he had learned one simple truth: when someone tells you not to worry, that is exactly when you should start worrying. On Mars, in the red dust beneath the surface of Valles Marineris, a woman named Dr. Lena Osei was already worrying. She was a xenoarchaeologist, a person who studied the ruins and remains of alien civilizations long dead. And she had spent the last 4 years digging through structures that were older than any known species in the galaxy. She had found something that made her hands shake. Deep in a chamber carved from stone that predated the Concorde by millions of years, she had discovered carvings and data crystals left behind by a civilization so ancient that even the elder species spoke of them only in whispers. The architects, the ones who had built the mass relay network that connected the stars, the ones who had vanished without a trace 70,000 years ago. The crystals told a story, and it was not a happy one. They spoke of a force called the Hollow, a power that came from beyond the edges of known space, a thing that moved through the galaxy in cycles, appearing every 70,000 years to wipe out every spacefaring civilization it could find, burning worlds, breaking fleets, erasing entire species as if they had never existed at all. The architects had been the last to fall, and before they died, they had left a warning carved into stone on 100 different worlds, hoping that someone, anyone, would find it in time. The galaxy was 3,000 years overdue for the next cycle. Lena sent her findings to the Admiralty with hands that would not stop trembling, and when her report landed on the same table as Arjun's black box recording, the room went very, very quiet. But the real blow came from across the stars, from a place where humanity had almost no power at all. It came from Ambassador Yuki Tanaka, Earth's representative to the Galactic Concord, a woman who was small in body but absolutely enormous in will. The Concord had called an emergency session, closed, sealed, restricted to elder species only, and they had locked the doors in Yuki's face and told her that humanity's presence was not required. Yuki Tanaka was not the kind of person who accepted locked doors. She called in every favor she had earned in 15 years of diplomacy. She threatened and bargained and pushed, and when none of that worked, she simply walked through a service corridor that the Concord's security had forgotten to guard, because human beings were very good at finding the cracks in things. What she found inside that chamber broke her heart. The Concord already knew about the Hollow. They had known for centuries the elder species, the ones with their vast fleets and their ancient wisdom and their condescending smiles, had been keeping this secret for longer than humanity had been flying among the stars. And their plan was not to fight. They were not building weapons or shields or defenses. They were not warning the younger species or preparing evacuation routes. They were not doing anything brave or noble or even decent. Their plan was surrender, a mass broadcast to the Hollow, offering submission, offering tribute, offering the youngest and smallest civilizations in the galaxy as sacrifices to buy the elder races enough time to flee into a pocket dimension they had been secretly constructing for the last 200 years. Humanity was on the tribute list. So were the Vren, the Delvari, the Terran, and dozens of other young species who had never been told the truth. They were all to be handed over like lambs to a butcher, their worlds and their people and their futures traded away so that the old and the powerful could survive. Yuki stood in the shadows of that chamber and listened to the elder ambassadors discuss the details of humanity's extinction with the same tone they might use to discuss a trade agreement. And something inside her turned from shock to ice, and then from ice to fire. She left the chamber without being seen. She returned to her quarters. She sat down at her secure terminal, and she typed a single encrypted message and sent it racing across the stars toward Earth at the speed of light. The message was short, and it was the most important thing she had ever written in her life. They are going to sell us, all of us. When that message reached Earth, when it was decoded and read aloud in the war room of the United Admiralty, when the 12 most powerful humans alive understood what it meant, the silence that followed was not the silence of fear. It was the silence of something waking up, something old and stubborn and furious, something that had carried humanity through ice ages and plagues and wars and every catastrophe that had ever tried to end them. It was the silence before the storm. The United Nations of Sol made the announcement on a Tuesday morning, and it was heard by every human being alive across 3 colony worlds and the homeworld itself. Earth was formally severing all ties with the Galactic Concord, effective immediately and permanently. The words were spoken by Secretary-General Adaizi Okafor, and her voice did not shake, though anyone who knew her well could see the fury burning behind her calm expression as she addressed the cameras. "We were told we were part of a galactic family," she said. "We were told that the Concord existed to protect all species, to ensure peace and cooperation among the stars. And now we have learned that this was a lie, We have learned that the elder species plan to sacrifice us without our knowledge or consent, to trade our lives and our worlds for their own survival. As of this moment, humanity stands alone, and we will face what comes on our own terms. Some species laughed, because what could the humans possibly do? They were the youngest, the smallest, the least advanced civilization with a seat at the table, and now they had thrown that seat away, like children having a tantrum. But others watched with something different in their eyes, something that might have been curiosity, or might have been hope. Humanity had 42 warships, it had 3 colony worlds, and 8 billion people on Earth, and another 2 billion scattered across Mars and the orbital stations. It had courage and stubbornness, and absolutely nothing else that could stop a force that had been destroying civilizations for longer than most stars had been burning. Admiral Rena Vasquez was given command of everything, every ship, every station, every weapon humanity possessed, and she accepted the responsibility with a nod and a silence that said more than any speech could have. She began immediately. There was no time for anything else. The orbital defense platforms around Earth were old, built decades ago for conflicts with pirates and minor territorial disputes, and Vasquez ordered them upgraded with everything the engineers could bolt onto them: heavier guns, thicker armor, more powerful shields. She ordered the asteroid belt mined and rigged with explosives, turning millions of rocks into a field of hidden bombs. She ordered civilian freighters stripped down and rebuilt as combat vessels, ugly and ungraceful, but armed with whatever could be made to fire. She knew it would not be enough. She knew it the way a doctor knows when a patient is beyond saving, with that quiet certainty that sits in the chest like a stone. But she also knew that humanity did not have the option of giving up, because giving up meant extinction, and Rena Vasquez had not been born with the ability to accept that. While Vasquez turned the solar system into a fortress, Captain Arjun Malakar was sent on a mission that no one outside the Admiralty knew about. He took the Defiance and a small team to Mars, to the dig site where Dr. Lena Osei had found the Architect ruins, because the data crystal she had recovered contained something beyond just a warning. Deep beneath the red surface, in a chamber that had not been opened in 70,000 years, Arjun and Lena stood before a machine that still hummed with faint power. An Architect data core, half-functional, damaged by the endless weight of time, but still alive in the way that only truly magnificent technology could be after so many millennia. "Can you read it?" Arjun asked, and Lena nodded slowly, her fingers moving across the interface with the careful touch of someone handling something sacred. The data core did not contain a weapon. It did not contain shield plans or fleet designs, or any of the things they desperately needed. What it contained was far stranger and far more frustrating: a question. The Architects had left behind a complex, layered paradox, part mathematics, part philosophy, part something that did not translate into any language Lena had ever studied. It was beautiful and maddening, a puzzle that seemed to fold in on itself every time she thought she was close to understanding it. And alongside the paradox, the Architects had left a message, simple and sad and heavy with the weight of a species that knew it was about to die. "We could not answer. Perhaps you can." "What does it mean?" Arjun asked, staring at the swirling symbols on the ancient screen. "It means they built something," Lena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Something that required an answer to this question to activate, and they could never solve it. Whatever this question unlocks, the Architects believed it could stop the Hollow, but they went extinct before they could figure it out." Arjun felt the weight of that settle onto his shoulders, the hope of a dead civilization, passed forward across 70,000 years to whoever might come next, a desperate gamble made by beings who knew they were doomed, but refused to let their last act be surrender. He sent the data back to Earth, where it was immediately classified at the highest level and given to every mathematician, philosopher, linguist, and scientist humanity had. If this question could be answered, then perhaps, just perhaps, there was a chance. But the galaxy was not going to wait for them to figure it out. The first proof that the Hollow was more than a legend came when the Kyrath homeworld died. The Kyrath were one of the eldest species in the Concord. Massive, powerful beings who had ruled their sector for 50,000 years and whose fleet numbered in the tens of thousands. The Hollow Vanguard arrived at their world without warning. The ships, if they could even be called ships, were things that bent light around themselves and screamed on every electromagnetic frequency, filling the void with a sound that drove sensors mad and made pilots weep. They were black and formless and wrong in a way that the eyes refused to accept, as if they were holes cut in the fabric of reality itself. The battle lasted 11 minutes. 11 minutes for a civilization of 50,000 years to be erased from existence. Their fleet shattered, their world burned, their people turned to ash and silence. The Concord's tribute broadcast, the grand surrender they had planned so carefully, was sent directly at the Hollow fleet, begging for mercy, offering the younger species as payment. The Hollow did not respond. It did not negotiate, or acknowledge, or even slow down. It simply moved to the next system and began again. Because the Hollow did not want tribute, or surrender, or submission. It wanted deletion, complete and total and absolute. And it had been doing this for longer than any living being could comprehend. Panic spread across the galaxy like fire through dry grass. The Concord's plan had failed before it even truly began. Elder species that had felt safe behind their pocket dimension project began to realize that perhaps they were not as safe as they had believed. Some fled into the deep void between galaxies, hoping distance would save them. Some simply went silent, shutting down their communications and hiding in the dark, praying they would not be noticed. But a few, a very few, did something different. The Vren were insectoid beings, small and fierce and numerous, who communicated through clicks and chemical signals, and who had been placed on the tribute list alongside humanity. Their ambassador, a warrior queen named Ticket Soul, sent a message to Earth's Admiralty that was blunt and direct in the way that only the Vren could be. We were also to be sacrificed. We do not forgive this. Do you have a plan? The Delvari came next, aquatic beings from a water world near the galactic core, whose ships moved through space the way their bodies move through oceans, with grace and power and a beauty that made human engineers weep with envy. They, too, had been on the tribute list, and they, too, were furious. And then the Torun, silicon-based lifeforms who thought slowly but deeply, whose crystalline bodies could survive conditions that would kill any organic being, and whose patience was legendary even among the elder species. They sent a single message that took 3 days to compose. We will stand with you, if you will have us. Arjun read these messages in his quarters aboard the Defiance, and he felt something that he had not felt since this nightmare began. Not hope exactly, but something close to it. Something warm and stubborn that refused to die. He looked at the architect paradox on his screen, the swirling, impossible question that a dead civilization had left behind, like a letter in a bottle. And he thought about what Lena had told him, that this question was a lock, and somewhere in the galaxy there was a machine it would open. He did not know if they could solve it in time. He did not know if the answer even existed. He did not know if humanity and its tiny band of allies could survive long enough to find out. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. They were going to try. And they were going to try with everything they had, because that was what humans did when the universe told them to lie down and die. They stood up instead. The Hollow moved inward from the galactic rim like a tide of darkness, and it did not hurry, because it had never needed to hurry. It had been doing this for millions of years, and no civilization had ever stopped it. not once, not ever. And the cold patience of its advance was more terrifying than any speed could have been. System after system went dark. The signals would cut out mid-sentence, mid-word, mid-breath, and then there would be nothing but silence where a world had been. And the silence spread across the star maps like ink spreading through water. Earth had weeks, maybe a month, and everyone knew it. In a basement laboratory beneath the Admiralty complex in Geneva, a team of 37 of humanity's brightest minds worked without sleep on the architect paradox. Dr. Lena Osei led them, and she drove them hard because there was no choice. Every hour they spent resting was an hour closer to annihilation. The paradox was extraordinary. It was layered like an onion, with each solution revealing a deeper question beneath it, and it blended mathematics of a kind that human science had barely begun to imagine, with concepts that belonged more to philosophy than to physics. At its heart, the question seemed to circle around a single idea that none of the team could quite pin down. Something about consciousness and mortality, and the relationship between the two. Something about what it meant to be a thinking being that knew it would one day stop thinking. The architects were quasi-immortal, Lena explained to Arjun during one of his visits from the orbital station where the Defiance was being repaired and resupplied. They had technology that could reshape planets and bend the fabric of space. They were perhaps the most advanced civilization this galaxy has ever produced, and they could not answer this question. Why not? Arjun asked. Lena rubbed her eyes and took a long breath before answering. Because I think the question is about something they could never truly understand. The paradox asks about the value of a mind that knows it will end. It asks why a being that is aware of its own death would choose to create, to love, to hope, to build things that will outlast it. The architects lived so long that death was almost abstract to them, almost theoretical. They could describe it, but they could not feel it, not really. Not the way a species like ours feels it every single day. Arjun stared at her. You are saying that our greatest weakness, the fact that we die, might be the key to solving this? I am saying that the architects thought so, Lena replied. They left this question for whoever came after them, and they specifically noted that the answer would likely come from a species that was mortal, finite, and aware of it. They believed that only a mind shaped by the certainty of its own ending could truly understand what they were asking. The work continued, day after day, night after night, and the team made progress, slow, grinding, agonizing progress, peeling back layer after layer of the paradox, while the galaxy burned around them. And then a young engineer named Kofi Asante solved it, and he solved it in a way that no one expected. Kofi was 26 years old. He was not a mathematician or a philosopher. He was a signal processing engineer who had been brought onto the team because the Architect Data Core used frequency-based encoding that required his expertise to decode. He was quiet and serious, and he missed his family back in Accra, and he hummed to himself when he worked, a habit that sometimes annoyed his colleagues. He had been staring at the final layer of the paradox for 3 days straight, and his eyes were red, and his hands were shaking from too much caffeine, and he could feel the answer sitting just beyond his reach, like a word on the tip of his tongue that refused to come forward. And then he started humming, not deliberately, not even consciously, just the way he always did when his mind was working on something difficult. And the song he hummed was a lullaby that his grandmother had sung to him when he was a child, a simple melody in Twi that she had learned from her own grandmother, a song about the stars watching over sleeping children. He stopped. His hands froze over his console. His eyes went wide. It is not a number, he whispered, and Lena looked up from her own work across the room. What? The answer, it is not a number, it is not a formula, it is not a logical proof, Kofi said, and his voice was shaking now, not with exhaustion, but with the kind of awe that comes when you suddenly see something enormous that was always there but hidden. The paradox asks why a mortal mind would choose to create meaning in a universe that will eventually forget it. And the answer is not an argument. The answer is the act itself. The answer is the feeling, the specific resonance of a being that knows it will die and chooses to hope anyway. He turned to his console and began working with a speed and precision that startled everyone in the room. His fingers flew across the keys as he translated his grandmother's lullaby into a mathematical frequency. Not the notes themselves, but the emotion beneath them, the love and the sadness and the defiant tenderness of a woman singing to a child under stars that would burn long after both of them were gone. When he finished, he played the frequency through the Architect Data Core's interface, and the ancient machine responded for the first time in 70,000 years. Lights that had been dark since before humanity existed flickered to life, and a holographic display materialized in the air above the core, showing coordinates. Coordinates to a location hidden in the accretion disk of Sagittarius A star, the supermassive black hole at the center of the Milky Way galaxy. There is something there, Lena breathed. The architects built something at the galactic core and locked it behind this question, and we just opened the door. The news reached Admiral Vasquez within the hour, and she made the hardest decision of her life without hesitation, because hesitation was a luxury that extinction did not allow. She split humanity's forces, the bulk of the fleet, every warship, every armed freighter, every orbital platform, would remain at Sol to defend Earth, to fight a battle that could not be won, but that had to be fought anyway, buying time with blood and fire and the sheer stubborn refusal to die quietly. And one ship, one single fast ship, would carry the answer to the galactic core. The Defiance, Arjun's ship. Arjun accepted the mission the same way Vasquez had given it, without hesitation, without drama, with the quiet understanding of a man who knew exactly what was being asked of him and had already decided to say yes before the question was finished. But before the Defiance departed, before the engine spun up and the course was locked in, Earth did something that no one had planned and no committee had approved, something that came from the deepest part of the human spirit, from the place where stubbornness and hope and fury all live tangled together. They sent a transmission. It went out on every frequency, in every human language, boosted by every antenna and relay and satellite that humanity possessed, and it roared across the galaxy at the speed of light, washing over dead worlds and burning fleets and hiding civilizations and the vast uncaring void itself. This is Earth. We are the youngest. We are the smallest. We were abandoned and we were afraid. But we will not go quietly. We have found something in the ruins of those who came before. Not a weapon, but an answer to a question the galaxy forgot to ask. We are carrying it to the center. If any of you still believe that existence is worth fighting for, then fight. Not for us, but for the idea that the universe is better with minds in it than without. We will leave the light on. The transmission raced outward, and for a long and terrible moment, the galaxy was silent in response, just as it had been silent when the Concorde received the first warning, just as it had been silent when world after world went dark. And then, something changed. A Vren battle fleet, 1,200 swarm fighters led by Ticket Sol herself, changed course and began burning towards Sol at maximum speed. A Delvari deep space Leviathan, a living ship the size of a small moon, turned away from its escape vector and sent a message that said simply, "We are coming." The Tauran crystal ships, slow but nearly indestructible, began their long march toward the sound of the human voice. And then others came, species that had been fleeing, species that had given up, species that had been hiding in the dark and pretending the universe would forget about them. Even members of the Concorde elder races, individuals and captains and commanders who were ashamed of what their governments had chosen, who had heard the human transmission and felt something stir inside them that they had thought was dead. One by one, and then in groups, and then in waves, ships from across the galaxy changed course and headed for the light that Earth had promised to leave on. It was a collection of the desperate and the brave and the furious, held together by nothing but a message from the smallest civilization in the galaxy. A message that said, "We are going to try, and trying is enough." Arjun watched the fleet reports update on his screen as the Defiance pulled away from Earth, and he felt tears on his face that he did not bother to wipe away. Behind him, Earth was preparing to die. Ahead of him, the center of the galaxy waited with whatever the architects had hidden there 70,000 years ago. And in his chest, a grandmother's lullaby hummed like a heartbeat, quiet and mortal and absolutely unbreakable. The Hollow came to Sol on a Wednesday, and it came without warning and without mercy, and the sky above Earth filled with shapes that the human eye refused to fully comprehend. Ships that were not ships, forms that bent light around themselves like wounds in the fabric of space. Things that screamed on every electromagnetic frequency, and turned the void into a cathedral of noise and horror. Admiral Rena Vasquez stood on the bridge of the ESS Constellation, her flagship, and she looked at the tactical display and saw death written across it in numbers that no amount of courage could change. The Hollow Vanguard outnumbered her fleet by a factor she did not bother to calculate, because the math did not matter anymore. Every minute she held, every hour she bought, was another hour for the Defiance to reach the galactic core. And so she pushed the fear down into the deepest part of herself and locked it away and became the thing her people needed her to be. "All ships, this is Vasquez," she said over the fleet-wide channel, and her voice was steady as stone. "We know what we are here to do. We are not here to win. We are here to hold. We are here to buy time for the people carrying our only chance to the center of this galaxy. Every second matters. Every minute is a gift, and I expect each and every one of you to be as stubborn and unreasonable as human beings have always been when someone tells us our time is up." She paused, and then she said something quieter, something that was not a command, but a promise. "It has been the honor of my life to serve alongside you." The battle began, and it was everything terrible and everything magnificent that war could be. The first wave of hollow ships hit the outer defense line near the asteroid belt, and the mines that Vasquez had planted detonated in a chain reaction that lit up the darkness for 1,000,000 kilometers. Rocks the size of cities erupted in nuclear fire and slammed into the advancing enemy, and for a brief shining moment it looked like it might actually slow them down. It did not slow them down. The hollow ships absorbed the explosions the way the ocean absorbs a stone. They rippled, they shuddered, but they kept coming. And Vasquez watched 3 of her outer picket ships vanish from the display in the time it took her to draw a single breath. "Fall back to the Jupiter line," she ordered, and her fleet pulled back to the second defense position, where the massive gas giant's magnetosphere had been weaponized by her engineers. They had turned Jupiter itself into a trap, using its radiation belts and magnetic field to create zones of lethal energy that no conventional ship could survive. The Hollow was not conventional. The energy washed over their ships like rain over glass, and they came through it without slowing, and Vasquez lost 12 more ships in the retreat. But her people fought. Oh, how they fought. Commander David Okonkwo of the ESS Reliant rammed his crippled destroyer directly into the throat of a hollow capital ship when his weapons went dead. And the explosion bought his escort group 45 seconds to fall back and regroup. Captain Mei Lin Zhou of the frigate Perseverance held a corridor through the asteroid belt for 6 minutes, with a ship that was burning from stem to stern, refusing to retreat until every civilian transport behind her had cleared the zone. A group of 12 civilian freighters, cargo haulers that had been fitted with nuclear warheads and skeleton crews of volunteers, made one-way runs directly into the heart of the hollow formation, and each one that detonated tore a hole in the enemy line that lasted just long enough for Vasquez to reposition her remaining forces. They were dying, and they were magnificent, and neither of those things could save them. And then the Allied fleet arrived. They came in from every direction, not in formation, not in any organized structure, just a ragged, furious, beautiful wave of ships from a dozen different species, pouring into the Sol system like water through a broken dam. Tikkat Sol's Vren swarm fighters were first. 1,200 small, fast, vicious craft that moved as one mind, clicking and chattering on their chemical communication networks, as they dove into the hollow fleet with weapons blazing. Behind them came the Delvari Leviathan, a living ship that sang in frequencies below human hearing, as it opened fire with bio-organic weapons that hit the hollow ships in ways that conventional arms could not. The Tauran crystal ships arrived last, slow and ponderous, but nearly indestructible, forming a wall of living stone that the hollow could not easily break through. And alongside them, dozens of other species, ships of every size and shape and design, crewed by beings who had heard Earth's transmission and chosen to answer it, who had decided that dying on their feet was better than surviving on their knees. Vasquez watched them arrive and felt something crack inside her chest. Not grief, not relief, but something bigger than both, something that did not have a name in any language she knew. All ships, all species, she broadcast on the open channel. Welcome to Sol. We are glad you came. Here is the tactical situation, and here is what we need. And then she did something that surprised every alien commander in the fleet. She gave them a plan. Not a vague strategy or a set of guidelines, but a detailed, minute-by-minute tactical plan that accounted for every species' strengths and weaknesses, that used the Vren's speed and the Delvari's power and the Torun's durability in perfect coordination with her own battered human fleet. No other species could have done it. No other species had ever needed to. The elder races had always fought with overwhelming force, and the younger races had never fought at all. But humanity had been fighting desperate battles since before it left its own planet, and the art of making the impossible merely improbable was written into their very bones. The Allied fleet held. They did not win. Winning was not possible, but they held, hour after hour, bleeding and burning and dying in the black void above the blue planet, buying time in the only currency that mattered. Across the galaxy, racing through the darkness at speeds that were tearing the Defiance apart, Arjun Malakar was spending that currency as wisely as he could. The route to the galactic core was a nightmare. They had to pass through hollow-occupied space, navigate around kill zones where entire star systems had been reduced to rubble, and thread through relay gates that were collapsing one by one, as the ancient architect network felt the strain of the galaxy's destruction. The Defiance lost its port engine array passing through the Kepler corridor when a hollow patrol spotted them and opened fire. Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes held the remaining engines together with what he called prayers, tape, and profanity, while the ship screamed through a gap in the enemy formation that was barely wider than the Defiance itself. They lost 2 crew members at the Arcturus relay when the gate destabilized mid-transit, and the energy surge tore through the hull. Arjun held Lieutenant Priya Sen's hand as the medics worked on the burns that covered half her body, and she looked up at him and said, "Do not you dare stop for me, Captain. Keep going." He kept going. The Vren escort fleet that had been assigned to protect the Defiance fought a running battle across 3 star systems, their swarm fighters peeling off in groups to engage pursuing holoships while the Defiance ran. One by one, the escort ships were destroyed, buying minutes and seconds with their lives. At the final choke point before the galactic core, a narrow passage between two collapsed stars where the Holo had established a blockade, Ticketsol made her choice. She was the last Vren ship still flying, her swarm fighter battered and leaking atmosphere, and the passage ahead was full of Holo vessels that the Defiance could not fight through alone. "Captain Malachar," she said over the comm, and her voice was calm in the way that only someone who has already accepted what comes next can be calm. "I am going to open a path for you. When you see the gap, you fly through it, and you do not look back." "Ticketsol," Arjun said, and his voice broke on her name. "Do not waste time on sentiment, human," she clicked, and he could hear what might have been a laugh in her alien voice. "But there is one thing. Your grandmother's lullaby, the one your engineer used to solve the puzzle. Teach it to my children, if I have any left. I think they would like it." She cut the channel before he could respond, and her ship accelerated into the blockade at full speed, with every weapon firing. And the Holo ships turned to engage her. And for 37 seconds, she was the brightest thing in that part of the galaxy. The gap opened, and Arjun flew through it, and he did not look back. But his hands were shaking on the controls, and his face was wet. The galactic core was a place of terrible beauty, a swirling maelstrom of gas and radiation and light, surrounding the supermassive black hole that anchored the entire galaxy. A place where stars were born and died in the same breath, where the laws of physics bent and groaned under the weight of forces beyond imagination. And hidden in the accretion disk, shielded by technology that was old when the galaxy's current stars were young, was the Architect engine, a structure of impossible size and impossible elegance, dormant for 70,000 years, waiting in the fire for someone to bring it the answer it needed. The Defiance limped toward it on dying engines, its hull cracked, its crew exhausted, its captain bleeding from a wound he had not had time to treat. They had arrived. The question now was whether the answer would be enough. The Architect engine was the most beautiful thing Arjun Malachar had ever seen, and it terrified him to his core. It hung in the fire of the accretion disk, like a cathedral made of light and mathematics, its surfaces shifting and folding in ways that his eyes could not follow, as if it existed in more dimensions than the three his brain was built to understand. The Defiance drifted toward it on maneuvering thrusters alone, because the main engines had finally given up somewhere in the last 1,000,000 kilometers, and the ship was held together by emergency welds and the sheer unwillingness of Chief Engineer Tomas Reyes to let it fall apart. "Captain," Tomas said from the engine room, his voice hoarse from hours of shouting over the sound of failing systems. "If we are going to do something, we should do it soon, because I am running out of things to hold this ship together with." He turned to the console, where the Architect frequency, Kofi's frequency, the grandmother's lullaby, translated into the language of the universe, was loaded and ready to transmit. His hands hovered over the controls, and for a moment, he was not a captain on a dying ship at the center of the galaxy. He was a boy on a rooftop in Mumbai, looking up at stars he did not yet know the names of, wondering if anyone out there was looking back. He pressed the button. The frequency left the Defiance's transmitter and reached the Architect engine, and for one heartbeat, nothing happened. One terrible, endless heartbeat where Arjun thought that they had come all this way for nothing, that the answer was wrong, that the lullaby of a grandmother from Accra was not enough to wake a machine that had been sleeping since before humanity learned to walk upright. And then the engine woke up. It did not activate the way human technology activated. There was no hum of power, no flash of energy, no dramatic surge. Instead, it simply began to exist more, as if it had been a shadow before, and was now becoming solid, and light poured from its surfaces in colors that Arjun had never seen and could not name. And the space around the Defiance sang with a vibration that he felt not in his ears, but in his bones, in his blood, in the deepest and most ancient part of his brain. A holographic display materialized on the Defiance's bridge, not from the ship's own systems, but projected directly by the engine itself, reaching across the void and into the vessel as if the walls were not there. And it showed Arjun something that made him sink into his chair with the weight of understanding. The engine was not a weapon. He had known this intellectually. Lena had told him the data had been clear, but seeing it confirmed, seeing the truth of it displayed in the architect's own visual language, was something else entirely. The engine was a signal amplifier, the most powerful communications device ever built, designed to broadcast a single message across every frequency, every dimension, every layer of reality that existed. It could reach into the spaces between spaces, into the realms where the hollow operated when it was not manifesting in normal space, into the very fabric of the universe itself. And as the display continued, Arjun learned the truth about the hollow, the real truth, the truth that the architects had discovered too late to save themselves. The hollow was not an invader. It was not a conqueror, or a destroyer, or an enemy in any sense that those words normally meant. It was a custodian, an automated system built by a civilization so ancient that even the architects had not known their name, created for a single purpose, to monitor the galaxy for signs of stagnation. The precursors who built the hollow had observed that civilizations rose and fell in cycles, and that over time the cycles became repetitive. The same kinds of empires, the same kinds of wars, the same kinds of minds, over and over and over. A galaxy trapped in a loop of its own making, producing nothing genuinely new, creating nothing that had not been created 1,000 times before. The hollow was the reset button. It swept through every 70,000 years and cleared the slate, pruning back the garden of civilization so that new growth could emerge. And it had been doing this for so long that no living being remembered why. But the precursors had built in a failsafe, because they were wise enough to know that their judgment might not be perfect. Stagnation was not the only possible outcome. They had designed the hollow to stop, permanently and irreversibly, if it ever encountered proof that genuine novelty still existed in the galaxy, proof that the cycle of repetition had been broken, and that something truly new had emerged. The proof it required was the answer to the paradox, an answer that could only come from a kind of mind that the galaxy had never produced before, a mind that was mortal and aware of its mortality, and that chose to create meaning anyway, not because it would last forever, but because the act of creation itself was the meaning. The architects had understood the theory, but could not produce the answer, because they were not mortal enough. The elder species of the Concord had never even tried, because they were too busy building empires that looked exactly like the empires that had come before them. The galaxy had been spinning in the same patterns for millions of years, and no one had ever broken free of the loop, until a young engineer from Accra hummed his grandmother's lullaby and felt the truth of it in his chest. That love does not need to be eternal to be real. That a song does not need to last forever to be beautiful. That the act of singing to a child under temporary stars is itself the answer to every question the universe has ever asked about why any of this matters. Arjun looked at the display, and he understood, and he initiated the broadcast. The engine took Kofi's frequency, that small, mortal, impossibly human sound, and it amplified it beyond anything that physics should have allowed. It sent it outward in every direction at once, not just through normal space, but through the dimensional layers where the hollow existed, through the quantum foam beneath reality, through the very architecture of the universe that the precursors had understood, and everyone since had forgotten. The lullaby, a grandmother's love, translated into the language of mathematics, amplified by a machine older than the stars, washed across the galaxy like sunrise. At Sol, where the battle still raged, where Admiral Vasquez was bleeding on the bridge of a flagship that had lost half its hull and most of its crew, where the Allied fleet was down to a third of its original strength and still fighting with everything it had left, the hollow ships stopped. They stopped all at once, every single one of them, as if a switch had been thrown. The weapons that had been burning through shields and armor fell silent. The electromagnetic scream that had filled the void since the battle began cut off as suddenly as a held breath. And then they began to dissolve. It was not destruction. It was something more like completion. Like a machine finishing its task and powering down for the last time. The hollow ships came apart in streams of light that rose from their hulls like steam from hot water, curling upward into the void and fading. And one by one, the terrible dark shapes that had haunted the galaxy for millions of years disappeared and left behind nothing but empty space and silence. Vasquez watched them go, and she gripped the armrest of her command chair so hard that her knuckles turned white, and she did not speak because there were no words for what she was seeing. Across the galaxy, the same scene played out over 1,000 burning worlds. The hollow dissolving, fading, ending, its purpose either fulfilled or overridden by the small mortal sound that had reached it from the heart of the galaxy. The custodian had heard something new, something it had been waiting millions of years to hear, and it had recognized that the cycle was broken at last. It was over. In the weeks that followed, the galaxy tried to make sense of what had happened. The galactic concord collapsed under the weight of its own shame, as the elder species that had tried to sacrifice the younger ones found themselves facing a universe that no longer respected or feared them. Ambassador Yuki Tanaka stood before the empty chamber where the Concord had once held court, and felt nothing but exhaustion and a fierce, quiet satisfaction. A new coalition formed, not like the Concord, not built on age or power or the ability to dominate, but on a principle that had been encoded in Earth's transmission and proven in the fire of battle. That every mind matters, that every voice has value, that the youngest and smallest can carry the answer that the oldest and greatest could not find. Kofi Asante became the most famous human in the galaxy, which embarrassed him enormously. He gave one interview, during which he said that his grandmother would have thought the whole thing was very funny. And then he went back to his laboratory and his work and his quiet life, because he had never wanted to save the galaxy. He had just been humming. Dr. Lena Osei returned to her ruins on Mars and began the long work of cataloging everything the architects had left behind, because there was so much more to learn, and she was not the kind of person who stopped asking questions. Admiral Vasquez retired with full honors and moved to a small house by the sea in Portugal, where she sat on her porch each evening and watched the stars come out, and felt the weight of all the people she had lost and all the people she had saved, and both numbers were larger than she could hold in her heart at once. And Arjun Malakar stood on the observation deck of a rebuilt station above Earth, 3 months after the end of everything, and he held a data chip in his hand. Been recovered from the wreckage of Ticket Sol's swarm fighter, found drifting in the debris field of the choke point where she had made her stand. Her ship's data core had survived, as Vran engineering often did, and her personal logs had been intact. Arjun had read them all. Every entry, every observation, every sharp and funny and surprisingly tender thought that the fierce insectoid warrior had recorded over the years. And the last entry was not text, but audio. He played it, standing alone on the observation deck, with the blue curve of Earth below him and the stars above him. And what came through the speaker was Ticket Sol's voice, clicking and buzzing in the Vren way, humming a melody. She was humming the lullaby, Kofi's grandmother's lullaby. She was humming it badly, completely off-key, with a rhythm that did not quite match, because Vren vocal structures were not built for human music. And halfway through the recording, she stopped, and made a sound that Arjun's translator rendered as laughter, deep and genuine, and full of something that might have been wonder. "This is a ridiculous song," her voice said. "It is simple and short, and it should not make me feel the way it does. But here I am, a warrior of the Vren, humming a human lullaby in my quarters, like a hatchling. And I cannot stop, and I do not want to stop, and perhaps that is the entire point." Arjun held the data chip against his chest, and he cried and he smiled, and the two things happened at the same time, because that is what it means to be mortal, to hold grief and joy in the same heart, in the same breath, and to find that neither one diminishes the other. Below him, Earth turned slowly in the light of its star, scarred but alive, small but unbroken, surrounded by the ships of 100 species that had come because a tiny civilization had refused to go quietly. And somewhere out in the deep void between galaxies, far beyond the reach of any telescope or sensor, something very old and very quiet heard the fading echoes of a grandmother's lullaby carrying across the infinite. Dark, and it paused, and it listened, and for the first time in a span of time that had no name, it turned and began moving toward the light. Because that is what the light is for, not to last forever, but to shine while it can, and to remind the darkness that it was never the only thing there was.